What if the very documents meant to protect a family's legacy turned out to be the very things that could destroy it? Imagine this. Locked away in a luxurious California estate, past the manicured hedges and behind the guarded gates, files are tucked out of sight. Not just bills, not just old letters, no. We're talking about something far more sinister. Allegedly forged medical records, altered birth certificates, pieces of paper that could, if true, call into question the story the world has been told about Meghan Markle, Prince Harry, and their children. It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? Too dramatic to be real. And yet, here we are, staring down a mystery so charged that even seasoned royal commentators hesitate to say the words out loud. But you're about to hear it. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's rewind. Think back to when Meghan Markle first stepped into the royal spotlight. She was cast as a refreshing outsider, a breath of modern air sweeping into centuries-old corridors. Every smile, every carefully posed photograph was designed to radiate hope, change, and progress. She wasn't just a duchess, she was the face of reinvention. But what if behind the glimmering exterior, there were secrets so carefully concealed that exposing them now feels like ripping open the very fabric of a myth? You see, the controversy isn't about whether Meghan wanted privacy. Everyone wants that. It's about what privacy was allegedly used to protect. And this isn't just gossip. We're talking about paperwork, cold, official, irrefutable. Or at least, it should be irrefutable. What happens when the very documents you trust, the ones that declare your birth, your health, your truth, look like they've been altered? Pause for a moment and ask yourself this. Why would anyone need to tamper with birth certificates? Why would anyone risk forging medical files? The implications aren't small. They're massive. Because if this story is even half true, it doesn't just affect Meghan and Harry's children. It ripples through the monarchy, through the legacy of Queen Elizabeth, through the idea of legitimacy itself. And that's where the tension really builds. Because the timing of this alleged discovery is no coincidence. The royal family is fractured. King Charles is balancing his reign on a knife's edge. Prince William is under pressure to safeguard the crown. And Harry and Meghan? They've chosen exile, throwing rocks from across the ocean. But while they wage their war in interviews and Netflix deals, what's hiding in their estate might carry more weight than any documentary ever could. Think about this. For years, skeptics whispered about inconsistencies. People noticed odd details surrounding Archie's birth announcement. They noticed delays in releasing documents. They spotted contradictions in what hospitals were mentioned or weren't. At first, it was dismissed as nitpicking, the paranoid ramblings of conspiracy theorists. But now, with talk of altered records surfacing, those whispers don't seem so far-fetched, do they? This is where the emotional punch lands. Because it isn't just about Meghan. It isn't just about Harry. It's about children. Two innocent names caught in the crossfire of titles, inheritances, and a dynasty obsessed with image. Archie and Lilibet never asked to be pawns in this twisted game. But if their documents were truly tampered with, then they've been dragged into something much darker than royal drama. They've been made into symbols of deception. Here's the irony. Meghan and Harry built their brand on authenticity, on rejecting the crown's cold traditions, on stepping away to live their truth. And yet, if the documents discovered in that estate are genuine, then their truth is built on lies. The contradiction is breathtaking. The very people who demanded transparency from the monarchy may have buried their own secrets deeper than anyone could have imagined. Now let's talk about the estate itself for a moment. Montecito, a place of wealth, privilege, and privacy. Celebrities walk their dogs down quiet streets. High fences block curious eyes. It's the perfect hiding place for scandal. But as history shows us, secrets have a way of slipping through cracks. Think Watergate. Think Panama Papers. Think of every major scandal that was meant to stay buried. They all had one thing in common. Someone found the documents. Someone pieced together what wasn't supposed to be pieced together. And now, the whispers say, Meghan's estate has yielded its own Pandora's box. Forged records that shouldn't exist. Medical files that don't line up with public narratives. It's enough to leave even skeptics unsettled. But before we go further, let's take a step back and breathe. Because I know what you're thinking. Is this real? Could it all be fabrication? A smear campaign? These are valid questions. And that's exactly why this story matters right now. Because whether true or not, the allegations alone strike at the very heart of royal credibility. And credibility, once fractured, is almost impossible to repair. Here's a thought for you. If these records exist, who else knows about them? Who's holding copies? And if they've been altered, who did the altering? Was it done out of desperation? Out of arrogance? Out of fear? The motives are as tantalizing as the documents themselves. And yet, what we have now are fragments, just enough to fuel the fire, not enough to put it out. But one thing is certain. This story won't stay hidden forever. Because when the world senses blood in the water, it circles fast. The press is hungry. The monarchy is alert. And Meghan and Harry are cornered in ways they never expected. And so we arrive at the edge of the cliff, where the ground feels shaky and the air thick with anticipation. The question isn't just what's in those files. The real question is what those files mean. Because if the story they tell is different from the one we've been sold, then every royal headline of the past 5 years suddenly looks different. Every carefully crafted image of family and unity shatters. Every photograph becomes a performance, not a memory. But what comes next? That's where things turn from shocking to truly explosive. Because the birth certificates were only the beginning. What investigators claim to have uncovered inside Meghan's estate could pull back the curtain on a web of lies stretching far beyond 2 children. And trust me when I say, no one, royal or otherwise, saw it coming. Behind those pristine white gates, beyond the towering hedges of Montecito, there's a silence that feels almost unnatural. The kind of silence money buys. The kind of silence that conceals. Meghan Markle's private estate has long been framed as a sanctuary, a retreat from royal chaos, a bubble of peace where she, Harry, and their children could finally breathe. But let's ask the unsettling question. What if that sanctuary doubled as a vault for secrets? What if the mansion that symbolized freedom and independence was also the hiding place for documents powerful enough to shake the foundations of the monarchy? That's the hook. The estate isn't just real estate. It's a fortress of image management. The irony is glaring. A place built on luxury and openness, but sealed with the tightest secrecy imaginable. Think of it this way. Castles once protected kings. Today, estates like Meghan's protect reputations. And reputations, when threatened, are worth more than kingdoms. Let's paint the picture. Rolling lawns stretch out like green carpets. A Spanish-style mansion glows under the California sun. To the casual observer, it's idyllic, almost dreamlike. Pools, tennis courts, lush gardens, everything designed to project the idea of success, peace, and escape. But here's the contradiction. Inside those serene walls, files were tucked away. Not photo albums, not love letters. Files. And not just any files, allegedly forged medical documents and altered birth certificates. The very things that tell the story of a family. Have you ever noticed how the most beautiful places often hide the darkest secrets? History is littered with examples. The grand palaces of Versailles hid corruption. The elegant estates of Hollywood masked abuse and scandal. And Meghan's estate, it seems, may not be any different. The idea of sanctuary collides head-on with suspicion. But why this estate? Why here and why now? Let's ask the uncomfortable question. Was it arrogance or fear that led to hiding these documents in such an obvious yet guarded place? After all, Montecito isn't some random choice. It's a haven for celebrities who know how to play the media game. Oprah lives nearby, so do countless other A-listers. Privacy here is expected, even worshipped, which makes it the perfect backdrop for locking away something the public should never see. Think about the contrast. Meghan once claimed to crave privacy from the relentless scrutiny of the palace. And yet, if these whispers are true, her estate became the very place where explosive secrets were hidden. Privacy not as protection, but as concealment. Now let's zoom in. Imagine investigators, whistleblowers, insiders, maybe even palace-linked figures, finally getting a glimpse of what lay inside. Stacks of papers, folders labeled with names. The unmistakable smell of something that doesn't quite add up. And then the discovery. Birth certificates with signs of tampering. Medical files with discrepancies. Why does this matter? Because an estate like Meghan's isn't just a home, it's an archive. Every choice about where to store things speaks volumes. A locked drawer in a Montecito mansion doesn't just say privacy. It says control. It says, this is mine, and you don't get to question it. But what happens when that control is breached? When secrets spill, here's where the tension sharpens. This chapter isn't just about a house. It's about symbolism. The estate is a stage set. Every photograph of Meghan and Harry walking the grounds, smiling in curated shots, is a performance for the world. And yet, behind that performance may lie a parallel story written on paper, hidden behind closed doors. Do you see the contradiction? On one hand, the estate screams independence. We broke free from the monarchy. We made our own life. On the other hand, it whispers dependence on secrecy. But don't look too closely at the foundations. That duality is what grips audiences, because it's human. Who hasn't tried to present one face to the world while hiding another truth in private? Let's push deeper. Ask yourself, if you had something to hide, would you bury it far away or keep it close where you could monitor it? Meghan's estate wasn't chosen by accident. If these files truly were found there, it means the couple believed their home was impenetrable. And that belief, that's where the downfall begins. Every fortress in history eventually falls. And when it does, what pours out shocks the world. Think of the Berlin Wall coming down. Think of Pandora's box. The estate isn't just a mansion anymore. It's a metaphor for a secret life finally unraveling. Here's a chilling thought. What if the walls themselves could speak? What would they reveal about late-night conversations, about hurried whispers, about decisions made in panic? Would they echo the sound of shredded drafts, of documents altered under pressure? The mansion isn't just stone and wood. It's a witness. And here's where curiosity deepens. If investigators, or insiders, truly unearth these files within the estate, then the entire image Meghan and Harry built begins to crack. Because you can't hide behind walls forever. The higher the walls, the bigger the shadow they cast. And shadows, as we know, only grow when the truth is blocked from the light. So where does that leave us? We've walked through the gates. We've seen the manicured perfection. We've peeked behind the curtains. And what we've found doesn't match the story we were told. The estate, rather than being a symbol of liberation, becomes a symbol of concealment. But this is only the beginning. Because documents, once uncovered, demand inspection. They demand explanation. And what investigators claim they saw inside those files. That's what turns whispers into scandals. That's what transforms curiosity into outrage. And yet, we haven't even opened the most shocking file yet. Because while the estate set the stage, what was hidden inside is about to drag us into even darker territory. And trust me, the next chapter doesn't just question privacy. It questions legitimacy itself. Whispers. That's how it always begins, doesn't it? Not with headlines. Not with official statements. With whispers. Quiet speculation that creeps through conversations, drips into online forums, and slips into late-night discussions among those who dare to ask the questions others are too afraid to voice. For Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, whispers have followed them since the very beginning. But whispers about forged records, that's something else entirely. These weren't the typical mutterings about fashion choices or awkward interviews. No, these were hushed suspicions that cut to the core of identity itself. Questions about Archie, questions about Lilibet, questions that strike at the heart of who these children are, and whether the official story matches the private truth. Ask yourself, why did the rumors start at all? Rumors don't just appear out of thin air. They need a spark, a strange detail, an inconsistency, a pause that lasts a second too long. And Meghan and Harry provided plenty of sparks. Think back. Remember how secretive Archie's birth was compared to royal tradition? No immediate photos on the hospital steps. No triumphant wave to the press. No detailed announcements with times and places that the public had come to expect. Instead, there was confusion. First reports suggested Meghan was in labor when, in fact, the baby had already been born. Then there were conflicting accounts of the hospital. Was it Portland Hospital in London? Was it a private setting? The palace's statements contradicted themselves, leaving observers scratching their heads. To some, these were innocent mistakes, the messy nature of a couple trying to wrestle back control from a suffocating royal machine. But to others, they were red flags. And that's when the whispers began. Whispers that the timeline didn't make sense. Whispers that medical details had been scrubbed or altered. Whispers that certain records simply weren't where they should be. It was the silence that fueled the fire. Meghan and Harry, rather than addressing the inconsistencies, doubled down on their privacy. They spoke broadly about protecting their children from the spotlight. And while many sympathized, others began to wonder, was privacy a shield, or was it a cover? Here's where irony twists the knife. By refusing to share details, they created a vacuum. And vacuums demand to be filled. In the absence of clear information, people filled the gaps with speculation. And speculation, once it takes hold, is almost impossible to control. But what if it wasn't just speculation? What if someone, somewhere, saw something? A draft certificate with erasures. A medical file with missing pages. A detail that didn't align. This is where whispers morph into something more tangible. Imagine working in a hospital, seeing a document that doesn't look right. Do you ignore it? Do you tell a friend? Do you leak it? Every great scandal in history began with a single person noticing something off. Watergate, Panama Papers, Cambridge Analytica. It always starts small. And whispers are the first cracks in the dam. Now let's pause. Consider how dangerous whispers can be for a family like Meghan and Harry's. Their entire public persona rests on trust, on the idea that they are speaking truth against a monarchy of lies. But when whispers flip that narrative, suggesting Meghan and Harry are the ones hiding lies, their entire foundation begins to wobble. That's why whispers matter. They aren't just idle gossip. They are seeds. Seeds that grow into suspicion, suspicion that grows into scandal, scandal that grows into headlines. And once the headlines come, there's no turning back. Have you ever noticed how whispers always seem to surface at the worst possible times? For Meghan and Harry, it happened while they were already at war with the palace, when every move was under scrutiny, when public sympathy was beginning to fracture. And then, right on cue, the whispers about forged records gained traction. Forums buzzed. Twitter threads spiraled. Articles hinted without stating. And suddenly, what had once been dismissed as fringe conspiracy theory began to look like something more. Because too many details didn't add up. Too many gaps begged for answers. Ask yourself, if you were Meghan, would you not have cleared this up with transparency? A single verified certificate. A single official medical statement. But instead, silence. And silence is fuel. It's the psychology of rumor. People don't believe whispers because they're proven. They believe them because they could be true. And with Meghan and Harry, the whispers fit too neatly into existing narratives of secrecy, defiance, and control. Here's the twist. Whispers alone can't damage reputations permanently. They need confirmation. They need evidence. And according to those who claim to have seen inside Meghan's estate, that's exactly what the whispers led to: files, documents, papers that turned speculation into something more dangerous. But before those files were unearthed, the whispers themselves created the perfect storm. They softened the public's defenses. They primed people to accept the possibility of forgery. And when you've already been primed, shocking revelations don't feel like leaps. They feel like confirmation. So ask yourself, why do people whisper instead of shout? Because whispers feel safer. Because they travel under the radar, growing stronger until they can no longer be ignored. That's how scandals survive. That's how truths, or lies, spread. And that's how the whispers about Meghan Markle's records transformed from background noise into the drumbeat of a gathering storm. But here's where the tension tightens. Whispers can only carry you so far. Eventually, someone has to step forward with proof. Eventually, the rumors either collapse under scrutiny or explode into undeniable reality. And in this case, it was the latter. Because after the whispers came the files. Medical files that didn't align with the official narrative. And when those surfaced, everything changed. What happens when the paper trail doesn't match the story? That's the question that hovers like a storm cloud over this next chapter. Medical records. Cold, clinical, factual documents that are supposed to leave no room for ambiguity. Numbers, dates, names, signatures, things that cannot be twisted by interpretation. They're meant to be the truth in ink. But what if those very papers, the ones tied to Meghan Markle, her pregnancies, and her children, looked altered? Think about it for a moment. For centuries, monarchies have obsessed over bloodlines. Proof of birth isn't just bureaucracy, it's legitimacy. It's the difference between heir and imposter, between royal child and commoner. And yet, in Meghan's case, The medical files connected to her pregnancies became some of the most heavily guarded secrets in royal history. Why? That's the million-dollar question. Normally, royal births are a spectacle of transparency. The public gets the hospital, the doctors, the timing, even the smiling photographs hours later on the hospital steps. Diana did it. Kate did it 3 times. It's tradition, it's expectation, it's reassurance. But Meghan? The details were shrouded in mystery. No smiling steps outside Lindo Wing. No immediate presentation. Instead, statements that contradicted themselves. A palace press office announcing she was in labor, hours after Archie had reportedly already been born. Confusion over whether it happened at home or at Portland Hospital. Details that shifted like sand. At the time, critics said it was just Meghan asserting control. A mother choosing privacy. And maybe that was true. But when medical files are later said to reveal discrepancies, that privacy suddenly looks less like protection and more like concealment. Picture this. A file folder with Meghan's name on it. A document showing prenatal care that doesn't align with timelines released to the press. Pages where information looks redacted or replaced. Even signatures that raise eyebrows. Nothing obvious enough to scream, fake, to the untrained eye. But to someone looking closely, the cracks show. What if an entry lists a checkup on a date Meghan was photographed across the country? What if a note references a procedure that was never publicly acknowledged? What if the hospital name itself looks inconsistent with official statements? These are the kinds of small but damning details that turn a document from reassurance into a question mark. And let's talk about motive. Why would anyone alter medical records? The possible answers are chilling. Perhaps to maintain privacy in a way that crossed into deception. Perhaps to control a narrative that didn't match reality. Or perhaps, more darkly, to manipulate legal recognition of the children themselves. Because remember, medical files don't just prove pregnancy. They anchor everything that follows. The birth certificates, the legal documents, the royal claims. If the medical files wobble, the whole structure wobbles with them. Now, let's address the emotional punch. Imagine being a mother and knowing the world is questioning whether your files are authentic. Imagine the fury, the desperation to protect your children. Some would argue Meghan's secrecy is understandable, but others would argue that secrecy of this magnitude only breeds suspicion. Do you agree? Would you trust someone who hides the very documents meant to confirm their story? And then there's Harry, the man who spoke so passionately about protecting his family. How does he fit into this puzzle? Did he know the details? Did he help craft the secrecy? Or was he, too, caught in a web of half-truths that spiraled out of control? The files don't just implicate Meghan. They implicate their partnership, their entire brand. Here's the irony that makes this so riveting. Meghan and Harry accused the palace of lying, of withholding, of manipulating. They demanded transparency. They spoke their truth. And yet, if the medical files truly don't align, it flips the narrative on its head. They become the very thing they claim to fight against. Now, think about the wider stakes. These aren't just family papers. These are documents tied to children with royal titles. Children who may one day claim legitimacy to a throne, to inheritance, to history itself. If those files are called into question, it doesn't just affect Meghan and Harry. It affects the monarchy. It affects Britain. It affects the very idea of what it means to be royal. Ask yourself, what happens when the public loses trust not just in words, but in paperwork? Words can be spun. Images can be staged. But papers, that's where truth is supposed to live. And if those are compromised, then where does that leave us? Let's pull in a historical comparison. In the 1930s, King Edward VIII's abdication shook Britain, not just because of love and politics, but because of the paperwork behind it. The signatures, the legal declarations. The monarchy runs on documents. They are its lifeblood. And here we are, nearly a century later, questioning the documents tied to Meghan and Harry's children. The parallel is haunting. But here's the twist that keeps audiences hooked. The medical files were only part of it. They were the first crack. The first sign that things weren't as straightforward as they seemed. And as investigators looked deeper, they stumbled onto something even more explosive. Because if the medical files raised questions, the birth certificates screamed them. The transition is clear. The whispers had found form in medical discrepancies. But the real shock, the undeniable gut punch, was waiting in the next folder. Because when those birth certificates came to light, everything changed. Every child has one. A simple piece of paper that marks the beginning of life. A birth certificate isn't glamorous. It isn't flashy, but it is final. It is proof. Proof of identity, proof of parentage, proof of existence. And when it comes to royalty, a birth certificate isn't just paperwork, it's destiny. It determines titles, rights, and succession. Which is why, when whispers surfaced that Archie's and Lilibet's birth certificates didn't add up, the shock was seismic. Let's start with Archie. Born in May 2019, his arrival should have been the easiest story to tell. The child of a prince and duchess, celebrated by the world. But the moment his birth certificate was released, eagle-eyed watchers noticed something strange. Meghan's name had been listed as Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Later, without explanation, the certificate was quietly altered. The Rachel Meghan part disappeared, leaving only her royal title. Why? No one ever got a clear answer. Officials brushed it off as clerical, but critics pounced. Why would a legal document for a royal child be edited weeks after the fact? Now, with the alleged discoveries inside Meghan's estate, that odd change suddenly looks less like a mistake and more like a pattern. If one certificate was altered, how many more were? And to what extent? Then came Lilibet. Born in California, June 2021. The first royal baby born outside the United Kingdom in modern times. Her birth certificate, filed in Santa Barbara County, listed Harry simply as the Duke of Sussex. Meghan, once again, appeared under her legal name. On the surface, it seemed straightforward. But the controversy exploded when observers compared Lilibet's document with Archie's altered one. Why the inconsistencies? Why the shifts in naming conventions? And why, if nothing was unusual, did Meghan and Harry fight so hard to control even these basic details? Here's where it gets darker. Those who claim to have seen the documents hidden within Meghan's estate allege that the certificates didn't just contain odd name changes. They contained signs of tampering, rewritten sections, dates that didn't align with public announcements, even formatting inconsistencies suggesting pages may have been redone. For ordinary families, this might be dismissed as clerical errors. But for a royal family, every single detail is supposed to be airtight. Ask yourself, why would anyone risk altering something so sacred? Was it about aligning the narrative with Meghan's and Harry's carefully curated public image? Was it about controlling the way the children's names and titles would be used in legal history? Or was there something deeper, something tied to questions of legitimacy that no one dared say out loud? The emotional gut punch is this. Birth certificates are supposed to be pure. They're supposed to be beyond doubt. And yet here, the very documents that should have ended speculation only fueled it. Instead of providing clarity, they invited more questions. And questions are dangerous when they circle around children tied to the British throne. Think about the ripple effect. If Archie's and Lilibet's documents are compromised, what does that mean for their titles, their claims, their place in the royal line? The monarchy thrives on precision. Every step, every document, every tradition exists to prevent exactly this kind of doubt. Yet here we are, staring at the possibility that the foundational papers for two royal children may not be what they seem. Now, let's step into irony again. Meghan and Harry accused the monarchy of racism, of coldness, of control. They presented themselves as truth-tellers, exposing the palace machine. And yet, the alleged tampering of their own children's birth certificates flips the script entirely. The rebels against secrecy become the architects of it. Do you see the contradiction? They fled the palace claiming they wanted authenticity. But authenticity doesn't hide. Authenticity doesn't alter. Authenticity doesn't change names on official paperwork weeks after birth. If true, what's on those certificates tells a story not of freedom, but of fabrication. Let's look at a historical comparison. Queen Elizabeth II's birth certificate was so heavily protected that it was guarded during World War II. Every detail about royal births has traditionally been witnessed by officials to prevent doubt. In fact, until the late 20th century, government ministers were required to be present at royal deliveries to ensure no switch or fraud occurred. That's how seriously the monarchy takes this issue. And yet, in Meghan's case, the very documents that should have reassured the world instead became the source of suspicion. And this is where the cliffhanger builds. Because if the birth certificates show signs of alteration, then the next logical question is motive. Who benefited? What was gained? And what was at stake? These aren't just edits for style. These are alterations that could affect titles, money, inheritance, and ultimately, power. But here's the most haunting part. What was uncovered in those certificates may not just point to paperwork errors or even vanity-driven changes. According to those who claim to have examined the files, the inconsistencies point towards something far more explosive, a deliberate effort to control the royal narrative at its root. And if that's true, then we're not just talking about paperwork. We're talking about legitimacy itself. But as jaw-dropping as the certificates were, they weren't the final stop. Because once you ask why, the trail leads somewhere even more controversial. Somewhere that suggests the real motive was never about names or style at all. It was about power. And power, when it collides with secrecy, always leaves destruction in its wake. Titles. In the British monarchy, they're more than names. They're currency. They're shields. They're weapons. A title determines where you stand at the royal table, how much respect you command, and yes, even how much wealth you can claim. And when it comes to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's children, the question of titles has been one of the most bitter, divisive battles in modern royal history. But here's the kicker. If the documents unearthed in Meghan's estate really were tampered with, then it may not have been about privacy at all. It may have been about titles. Let's rewind. When Archie was born in 2019, people expected him to be styled as a prince. After all, he was the son of Prince Harry, grandson of the future king, and great-grandson of the reigning monarch, Queen Elizabeth II. And yet, nothing. He was called Master Archie Harrison Mountbatten-Windsor. No royal title. No HRH. Meghan and Harry claimed this was their choice, a way to give their son privacy. But not long after, Meghan dropped a bombshell in that now infamous Oprah interview. It wasn't their choice at all. According to her, the palace deliberately denied Archie a title and even security because of his race. That allegation sent shockwaves across the globe. Headlines screamed of racism in the palace. Supporters rallied to Meghan's side. But skeptics raised an eyebrow. Was this really discrimination? Or was there more to the story? Here's where the alleged forged documents twist the narrative. Birth certificates and medical records tie directly into questions of legitimacy. Titles can't just be handed out like party favors. They rest on ironclad proof of lineage. If the paperwork is murky, the titles become shaky. And shaky titles mean shaky claims. Think about it. What if inconsistencies in Archie's and Lilibet's records raised quiet doubts behind palace walls? What if those doubts influenced decisions about titles? Suddenly, Meghan's claim of racism takes on a more complicated shade. Was it prejudice, or was it paperwork? And here's where the emotional punch lands. Imagine being Meghan. You've married into the most famous royal family on earth. You give birth to a child who should, by all accounts, hold a historic place in that lineage. And then you're told, no title, no HRH, no protection. Wouldn't you feel slighted? Wouldn't you feel enraged? But if the palace had concerns about documentation, would that anger still hold the same weight? Or would it look like something else entirely? Now let's turn to Lilibet. Born in the US, far from the traditions and scrutiny of Britain, her very birth certificate raised eyebrows. Not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. A royal child born on American soil, tied to California law instead of British protocols. By the time King Charles ascended the throne, Meghan and Harry pushed hard for their daughter to be called Princess Lilibet. And eventually, the palace quietly updated the royal website, acknowledging it. But if the underlying paperwork was questionable, then granting her that title becomes not a matter of birthright, but of choice. And choice means leverage. Let's ask the hard question. Were the documents altered to secure titles? If so, this isn't just a family squabble, it's a calculated power play. Because in the monarchy, titles aren't just ceremonial. They're bargaining chips. They affect inheritance. They affect standing in the line of succession. They shape the very narrative of who counts as royal. History offers a sharp reminder. In the 1930s, when Edward VIII abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, one of the fiercest debates wasn't about love, it was about titles. Would Wallis be a queen? Would she be addressed as Her Royal Highness? The answer was no, and that denial shaped her life and legacy. Titles matter. They always have. And in Meghan's case, they may explain everything. But here's the irony that makes this chapter sting. Meghan and Harry claimed they didn't care about titles. They claimed they wanted freedom, normalcy, the ability to raise their children outside the suffocating expectations of royal life. And yet, behind the scenes, they fought tooth and nail to ensure those very titles were recognized. Why? Because titles are power. And power, once tasted, is impossible to relinquish. Now, think about how the alleged forged records fit into this. If Archie's and Lilibet's documents contained irregularities, those irregularities could have jeopardized their claims to titles. By smoothing over those irregularities or erasing them entirely, the path to recognition becomes cleaner. But clean doesn't always mean honest. Here's where we pivot to the emotional contradiction. Meghan framed her battle as one against racism, as a mother protecting her children from a cruel institution. But what if, lurking underneath, the real battle was about status? About ensuring her children weren't just part of the family, but firmly cemented in its hierarchy? Ask yourself, does that make her a villain, or simply a player in a ruthless game where survival depends on titles? After all, the monarchy has always been about survival. Every king, every queen, every royal consort has maneuvered for power. Maybe Meghan was just following the oldest royal rule of all. Protect your children's place at any cost. But here's the cliffhanger that takes us into the next chapter. If Meghan and Harry weren't alone in this, if insiders, staff, or even legal advisors helped them shape or shield those documents, then the scandal grows bigger than just two parents protecting their children. It becomes a network of complicity, a conspiracy. Because secrets this heavy don't stay hidden without help. Secrets don't keep themselves. Someone has to hide them. Someone has to file the papers, make the phone calls, and lock the drawer. And when it comes to Meghan Markle's estate and the documents allegedly uncovered there, it's impossible to believe this was a one-woman operation. Secrets this heavy require insiders, loyalists, silent partners in concealment. And that's where the story begins to widen. Think about it. Meghan and Harry live in a multi-million-dollar estate. Staff come and go. Assistants handle the scheduling, the paperwork, the logistics. Lawyers draft and review documents. Doctors and nurses sign off on medical records. Nannies, security, housekeepers, each with eyes and ears. Do we really believe no one noticed? That no one saw the papers tucked away? If the whispers are true, someone knew. The question isn't whether they existed. It's who helped keep them quiet. Let's start with the staff. From day one, Meghan and Harry's household was a revolving door. Reports surfaced of assistants resigning, nannies leaving, aides complaining of impossible working conditions. At the time, the headlines painted Meghan as demanding, perhaps difficult. But what if some of those resignations were about more than personality clashes? What if, behind the polished PR, staff stumbled upon things they weren't meant to see? Documents, folders, details that didn't align. What would you do in that situation? Walk away, or stay and protect? Now picture the lawyers. The Sussexes employ a tight circle of attorneys, known for their aggressive tactics. These aren't just people who draft contracts. They're guardians of narrative. If documents tied to Archie and Lilibet showed irregularities, would lawyers step in to correct them? Would they advise silence, warning that public explanation could spiral out of control? Legal counsel exists to protect clients, even when that protection dances close to the line of concealment. And then there are the medical professionals, doctors and midwives who may have signed off on prenatal care, labor notes, or certificates. These are the people whose names appear on records. If files were altered, were those signatures forged? Or did someone in the system quietly adjust details with a nod and a wink? Medical institutions thrive on trust, but trust can be bent by influence, wealth, or pressure. After all, who would want to risk the wrath of the Sussex legal machine? This leads us to the inner circle of allies, people like Doria Ragland, Meghan's mother, or even close friends who have stood beside her through scandal after scandal. Would Doria have known about altered documents? Would she have helped keep them safe inside the estate? We know she's fiercely protective. We know she's loyal. But loyalty, when tested, can look a lot like complicity. And what about Harry? Let's not forget the prince himself. Was he a co-architect, fully aware of what was being hidden? Or was he shielded, told only fragments while the real work of concealment happened around him? Harry has often been portrayed as emotional, impulsive, driven more by passion than detail. That could mean two things. Either he was in on it, but reckless in his silence, or he was in the dark, a figurehead while Meghan and her team managed the details. Which version do you believe? Now consider the role of outsiders turned insiders, staff from the palace who once served Meghan and Harry, then transitioned with them to California. Did they carry with them not just loyalty, but knowledge of royal procedures? These are the people who knew how things were supposed to look. They would have known immediately if something was off. Did they help disguise the irregularities, or did they keep quiet, waiting for the right moment to leak? The betrayal factor is key here. Every great scandal hinges on betrayal. Someone always talks. Someone always leaks. The Sussexes may have trusted their insiders, but history shows trust is a fragile currency. Money runs out. Loyalty fractures. Anger festers. And when that happens, secrets spill. Could the documents hidden in Meghan's estate have been revealed by a disgruntled insider, someone tired of silence? Ask yourself. If you were in that house, working close to Meghan, and you saw documents that didn't match the public story, what would you do? Would you risk your career, your livelihood, your safety to expose them? Or would you tuck the knowledge away, letting whispers grow until the weight became unbearable? It's also worth asking, who had access to the estate itself? Not everyone could stroll into Meghan's study or Harry's office. These were restricted areas, guarded by trust and, often, locked doors. So whoever knew about the files didn't just stumble upon them. They were either deeply trusted, or they were determined enough to dig where they weren't supposed to. And that's where the cliffhanger sharpens. Because the real scandal isn't just that the documents existed. It's that someone, somewhere, decided to let them out. A leak. A deliberate act of betrayal. A decision to pierce the fortress of Montecito and expose what was supposed to remain sealed forever. Which leads us directly to the next chapter, the leak itself. The moment when whispers turned into revelations. The moment when hidden papers left the estate and landed in the wrong, or perhaps the right, hands. And trust me, that moment would change everything. It only takes one envelope, one USB stick, one snapshot of a page taken with a phone when no one was looking. Every great scandal, no matter how carefully buried, eventually cracks open with a leak. And in Meghan Markle's case, the alleged forged documents tied to Archie and Lilibet weren't destroyed. They weren't erased. They were hidden. And hidden things are always vulnerable to discovery. Picture this moment. A staff member, an insider, maybe even a visitor trusted enough to step into Meghan's study, stumbles upon a folder that looks wrong. Inside are papers stamped with official seals, but showing telltale signs of tampering. Erasures, inconsistent dates, perhaps even handwriting that doesn't match. The shock hits like a lightning bolt. Do they close the folder and pretend they saw nothing? Or do they take the risk, the enormous risk, of letting the world know? That's how it begins. Quietly, secretly, a document copied, a file smuggled out, whispers transforming into evidence. Leaks don't happen in a vacuum. They're born from tension. Someone inside Meghan's circle must have reached a breaking point. Was it a staff member, worn down by long hours and impossible demands? Was it a legal insider, furious over being asked to bend the rules one too many times? Or was it someone closer, someone who had once been fiercely loyal but felt betrayed? Betrayal, after all, is the most common motive for leaks. And then there's the timing. Leaks rarely happen by chance. They're calculated, released at moments designed to cause maximum impact. So ask yourself, why now? Why at a time when Meghan and Harry's relationship with the palace was already crumbling, when King Charles's reign was struggling to find stability, and when Prince William was emerging as the face of the monarchy? The answer may be that the leak wasn't just about documents. It was about power. Let's imagine the scene. A plain manila envelope arrives at the doorstep of a journalist known for chasing royal scoops. Inside, copies of birth certificates with suspicious alterations. Medical files with glaring inconsistencies. No note. No explanation. Just paper. Damning, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The journalist's hands tremble. They know what they're holding could ignite a firestorm. But they also know they need more. So they begin to dig. Leaks spread like wildfire because they thrive on curiosity. One journalist calls another. Editors whisper in late-night meetings. Fact-checkers pore over every line, looking for holes. The story snowballs. What began as a single envelope becomes a dozen conversations, 100 speculations, 1,000 headlines waiting to be written. But leaks don't just shake the media. They shatter the inner circle. Imagine Meghan's estate once the whispers of a leak reached her ears. Every staff member eyed with suspicion. Every lawyer interrogated. Every friend questioned. Who had access? Who betrayed her? Paranoia spreads faster than truth. And paranoia destroys trust. And yet, the irony is devastating. Meghan and Harry, who fled the palace claiming they wanted control, suddenly lose the very control they craved most. Their private estate, once a fortress, becomes the scene of the ultimate exposure. And exposure, once it begins, cannot be stopped. Here's where the emotional weight comes crashing down. Because a leak doesn't just reveal secrets. It humiliates. It forces people into the spotlight against their will. And in this case, it drags two innocent children into the storm. Archie and Lilibet. Too young to understand, too innocent to defend themselves, become the centerpieces of a scandal fueled by paperwork and betrayal. Ask yourself, who gains from such a leak? The palace, eager to weaken Meghan and Harry's influence? Disgruntled staff, seeking revenge? Opportunists, hoping to cash in on explosive documents? Or perhaps it wasn't about gain at all. Perhaps it was about conscience. A decision to reveal what had been hidden because silence felt like complicity. History teaches us that leaks change everything. The Pentagon Papers, WikiLeaks, Snowden's files. Once information escapes into the public domain, it can never be put back. Governments fall. Reputations collapse. And for Meghan and Harry, the alleged leak of those files set in motion a chain of events they could never have prepared for. Imagine the moment Meghan and Harry learned. A phone call from their publicist, voice trembling. The documents are out. Imagine Meghan's fury, Harry's panic. Do they deny? Do they attack the source? Do they claim fabrication? Every option is dangerous. Every move risks digging the hole deeper. Because denial only works if the evidence isn't solid. And these were papers. Hard copies. Records that can't be brushed away with words. This is the knife twist. Meghan built her image on controlling the narrative. A masterclass in media manipulation. But once those papers left her estate, she lost control forever. The narrative was no longer hers to write. It belonged to the press, the palace, the public. And the public, hungry for drama, devours stories like this. The leak didn't just expose documents. It exposed the fragility of Meghan's empire. The empire of image, of victimhood, of carefully curated authenticity. And once an empire cracks, every piece begins to fall. But here's where the cliffhanger sharpens. If the leak was real, then someone had to have orchestrated it. Someone close. Someone trusted. And once you start asking who betrayed Meghan, you realize the story doesn't just end with documents. It spirals into questions of loyalty, vengeance, and revenge. Which leads us to the next explosive chapter. How the palace reacted when the leak reached them. Because if you think the discovery rattled Meghan's estate, wait until you see the storm it unleashed behind palace doors. The palace walls have always been built to withstand scandal. Affairs, divorces, abdications. The monarchy has weathered storms for centuries. But the whispers of forged documents tied to Archie and Lilibet were different. They weren't about personalities, or politics, or even morality. They were about legitimacy. About whether the bloodline itself, the very heart of the monarchy, was as secure as it claimed. And when word of the alleged leak reached Buckingham Palace, silence fell like a thunderclap. Picture the scene. A dimly lit briefing room inside the palace. Aides huddled around a polished oak table. Papers spread out, phones buzzing with alerts. The king's private secretary leans forward, his voice low but urgent. The documents are out. A single phrase, and suddenly the air is electric. Every eye turns to Charles. The monarch, still adjusting to the heavy crown passed down after Elizabeth's reign, knows instantly what's at stake. The monarchy has survived divorces and feuds, but forged documents? That's a crack in the foundation. That's an earthquake. Let's pause here. Why would this hit so hard? Because monarchy isn't built on charisma alone. It isn't sustained by love stories or fairy tales. It's built on paperwork, on proof, on the cold assurance of birth certificates, succession orders, legal recognition. Strip that away, and you strip away the monarchy's reason for being. And so, behind palace doors, the response begins. Advisors scramble. Crisis teams draft statements that say nothing but look like something. Lawyers are summoned, asked to review every royal record tied to Archie and Lilibet. The press office works overtime, carefully calculating how much to deny and how much to ignore. Because here's the palace's golden rule: never explain, never complain. But this time, that rule feels like a noose. Silence looks like guilt. Denial risks exposure. And then there's William. Imagine him pacing the halls, jaw clenched, furious not just at the documents, but at the chaos they bring. He has spent years preparing for the crown, years cultivating stability while Harry and Meghan torched the family's reputation from abroad. For William, this isn't just scandal, it's sabotage. His children's future, his reign, his stability, it all hangs on the legitimacy of the bloodline. And now, thanks to his brother and sister-in-law, the world questions whether the line is secure at all. But perhaps the most intriguing reaction comes from the courtiers. The shadowy figures who have served monarchs for decades, some longer than Meghan has been alive. They've seen scandals rise and fall. They've buried secrets deeper than the public will ever know. And when whispers of forged documents reach them, their reaction isn't panic. It's calculation. Who benefits if the story grows? Who benefits if it dies? And most importantly, should the palace quietly let Meghan's credibility collapse under its own weight, or intervene to steady the ship? Here's where the irony cuts deep. For years, Meghan claimed the palace worked against her, planting stories, leaking details, orchestrating her downfall. And now, the palace is faced with a dilemma: do nothing, and Meghan collapses under scandal, or act, and risk confirming her accusations of interference. The monarchy is cornered, and in that corner, choices become dangerous. Think about King Charles, a man who spent decades as heir, finally ascending the throne late in life. His reign has always been precarious, overshadowed by his mother's legacy, threatened by his own past, and judged by the world's changing view of monarchy itself. For Charles, the forged documents are more than Meghan's problem. They're a threat to the continuity of the institution he's sworn to uphold. If Archie and Lilibet's legitimacy is questioned, then so too is the monarchy's ability to guarantee stability. And stability is all Charles has left to offer. Now, imagine the private conversations. Charles with Camilla, voices low over late-night tea. William with Catherine, strategizing quietly while their children sleep upstairs. Advisors whispering in corridors, wondering whether to reach out to Harry or cut him off for good. Each conversation filled with the same unspoken question: how do we contain this without burning down the entire house? And here's the emotional irony. The monarchy has always survived by projecting strength, by presenting a united front. But behind those palace walls, unity is an illusion. William pushes for silence. Charles leans toward legal clarity. Advisors argue for a middle path. And through it all, the Queen's absence looms like a shadow. Elizabeth would have known what to do. But Elizabeth is gone. And Charles is no Elizabeth. Meanwhile, the press senses weakness. Tabloids circle like vultures, headlines screaming of royal crisis and forgery scandal. Reporters camp outside the palace gates, demanding answers. Every no comment feels like confirmation. Every delay feels like guilt. And the palace, bound by centuries of tradition, has no playbook for a scandal like this. Ask yourself, if you were Charles, what would you do? Deny everything and risk proof emerging? Attack Meghan and Harry and risk looking petty? Or stay silent and risk the monarchy's credibility collapsing under the weight of suspicion? Every option is poison, and yet, one must be chosen. Here's where the cliffhanger sharpens. The palace's official response may have been silence, but behind closed doors, there were whispers of their own. Whispers that the palace was preparing to quietly investigate. Whispers that they wanted to know, once and for all, what Meghan's estate truly contained. Because if the monarchy was going to survive, it couldn't just rely on rumors. It needed facts. And that investigation, if it happened, would not only uncover more than Meghan ever expected, it would drag her into a confrontation she could never control. For every accusation, there's always a counterattack. Meghan Markle has never been the type to retreat quietly into the shadows, not when her image is at stake, not when the story threatens to slip out of her hands. And when whispers of forged documents and altered certificates began to gain momentum, Meghan's response wasn't silence. It was war. Think about Meghan's journey. From the moment she entered the royal family, she was painted as a fighter. A woman who challenged tradition, defied protocol, and refused to bend to the palace machine. That same defiance now fueled her counter-narrative. She knew the stakes. If the public believed the documents were forged, her credibility would collapse. So, she did what she's always done. She flipped the script. First came denial. Loud, clear, unambiguous. Statements from her team dismissed the claims as baseless smears. Lawyers fired off letters warning tabloids and broadcasters against repeating false allegations. Meghan positioned herself as the victim, targeted by a vicious campaign designed to silence her. "They've been after me from the start," she might say. "And now they've gone so far as to invent forgeries to discredit me and my children." But denial wasn't enough. Meghan understood something many public figures never grasp. Denial closes doors, but counter-narratives open new ones. So she moved quickly to reframe the scandal. Instead of forged documents, she called it a smear campaign orchestrated by the palace. Instead of inconsistency, she called it racism. Instead of secrecy, she called it protection. The genius of this strategy lies in how it taps into the emotions of her audience. Victimhood sells. And Meghan, once again, cast herself as the woman wronged by a cold, racist institution desperate to destroy her. She leaned on allies. The sympathetic press in America. Celebrity friends willing to drop hints on talk shows. Social media accounts that would amplify her side of the story. Carefully curated podcasts where she could tell her truth, unchallenged. In Meghan's hands, the scandal transformed from an accusation of forgery into proof of palace cruelty. "Why are they so obsessed with my children's documents?" she could ask. "Because they don't want them recognized as equals." And here's the emotional trick. By shifting focus away from the documents themselves and toward the reason people question them, Meghan turned defense into offense. Anyone who raised concerns wasn't exposing fraud. They were participating in prejudice. Anyone asking for clarity wasn't demanding truth. They were attacking her children. The strategy was brutal, effective, and familiar. It's the same playbook Meghan had used before, refined to perfection. But Meghan didn't stop there. She doubled down with performance. Appearances carefully staged to project calm strength. Photographs with her children, painting her as the devoted mother under siege. Emotional anecdotes about late-night tears, about explaining to Archie why some people don't want him to have what he deserves. Every move designed to tug at heartstrings, to turn suspicion into sympathy. And Harry? He played his part too. Fierce in his defense, quick to lash out. His role wasn't to explain the documents. That was too dangerous. His role was to frame the scandal as yet another assault on his wife, his family, his freedom. "They tried to destroy my mother," he might thunder in an interview. "And now they're trying to destroy my wife." By invoking Diana's ghost, Harry weaponized history. He knew the world's empathy for Diana was bottomless. If Meghan could be cast as the new Diana, then the palace could once again be painted as the villain. But here's where the contradiction cuts. For all her talk of transparency, Meghan's counter-narrative still avoided the core issue, the documents themselves. She never released the originals, never offered independent verification, never allowed journalists to scrutinize the files. Instead, she surrounded the issue with noise, racism, sexism, cruelty, betrayal. Effective distractions, but distractions nonetheless. And in that silence, the doubts only grew stronger. Ask yourself, would an innocent woman, falsely accused, not lay the truth bare? Would she not wave the unaltered certificates for the cameras, proving her innocence beyond doubt? The fact that Meghan didn't, or couldn't, spoke louder than her words ever could. The irony is devastating. By fighting so hard to control the story, Meghan only confirmed to skeptics that there was something to hide. Her counter-narrative turned loyalists into fanatics, but it also hardened critics into enemies. The middle ground shrank. People stopped asking whether the documents were real and started asking why Meghan refused to prove it. And yet, the counter-narrative achieved one thing. It bought time. Time to regroup, time to distract, time to shift the conversation away from paper and toward prejudice. But time is fragile, and time runs out. Because while Meghan's defense filled the airwaves, the media was digging deeper. Journalists hungry for the next scoop scoured every angle. Whispers of forged documents grew louder. And then came the frenzy. The media storm that turned a whispered scandal into a global fireball. And once the press had its teeth in the story, Meghan's counter-narrative would no longer be enough.